Part 1. You will hear 3 different extracts. For questions 1 to 6, choose the answer A, B or C, which fits best according to what you hear. There are 2 questions for each extract. Extract 1.
Increasing numbers of people are flying long distances, even for short holidays, and there is growing concern about the toll that sitting for long periods in cramped conditions may be taking on their bodies. Long-haul flights are defined as anything over 5 to 6 hours, but it's now common for a holiday to begin with a journey even longer than that. What can we do to minimize the risk?
Well, there are a number of preventative measures that can be taken. To counter dehydration, for instance, drink plenty of water during the flight and avoid alcohol, coffee, and tea. Confinement is the biggest issue for most travellers and the most controversial. I would recommend getting up and walking around the cabin once every hour or so and try to exercise in your seat by tensing and then relaxing your calf muscles. Despite calls for airlines to provide more legroom for passengers, there has been little progress in this area. I'm afraid the profit motive trumps any other concerns in most cases.
Extract 2.
The fair was packed with tourists and people from local towns. I joined a crowd watching a young woman who was using fresh indigo to dye cloth. It seemed I'd happened on the most fascinating part of the demonstration. Removing a length of fabric from a vat of yellow liquid, she hung it on a wooden rack. Other pieces of material that she dyed earlier were already hanging there and were gradually turning blue as the dye reacted with the oxygen in the air. What a stroke of luck to have witnessed this process. The fair provided plenty of other attractions too. One that stood out was the homemade confectionery, which not only looked good, but tasted delicious, and was being rapidly snapped up. I was browsing at a bookstall, munching on some toffee, when I noticed it had suddenly got very dark. The downpour hit a few minutes later, and had everyone scrambling for cover. Puddles quickly formed all over the fairground, and within a few minutes the place was practically deserted. On my way home, I couldn't help wondering about the fate of those pieces of freshly dyed fabric that had been hanging out to dry.
Extract 3.
Come on, you have to pay attention to what you're doing. There's no excuse for splashing about like that. Your technique was flawless when you were doing training laps before, and then as soon as you start racing against the others, it all goes out the window. I understand you're trying to go faster, but thrashing around like that won't get you there. I know you can do it. Just keep it simple, as we've been doing all week, and your times will soon improve. Now, the other thing you have to concentrate on is your breathing. You're still moving your head up and down too much. Get your style right, and when your arms and head are in the right position, it should come naturally. For now, stick to taking a breath once every 3 strokes. 1, 2, breathe. 1, 2, breathe. That's the way to do it.
Part 2. You will hear part of a radio program about oceanography. For questions 7 to 15, complete the sentences with a word or short phrase. You now have 45 seconds in which to look at Part 2.
Despite the fact that 71% of the Earth's surface is water, we know relatively little about the oceans, and yet they influence all life on Earth. For instance, more than half the world's population lives within 60 miles of the sea, but unfortunately, although we like living close to the sea, we are often a danger to it. Growing populations in coastal areas lead to more marine pollution. For example, some 6.5 million tons of litter finds its way into the sea every year, and crowded coastal zones are subject to more erosion. Some shorelines are eroding at the rate of 1 meter a year. People tend to displace wildlife too, so that coastal species struggle to survive. Given how kind the oceans are to us, we really ought to treat them better. Oil is one of the ocean's greatest resources. Around a third of all oil produced comes from offshore fields in our oceans. And of course, the seas that surround us are the largest source of high-protein food in the world. We eat about 29 million tons of fish every year. So much fish, in fact, that reproduction can't keep up. Many fish populations are rapidly diminishing. Fish like tuna, salmon and cod are disappearing from the seas because of overfishing. And yet, 80% of all life on Earth is found under the ocean's surface. There's a whole new world down there, even more populous than our own. The largest marine mammal in the world is the blue whale. It can grow up to 33 meters long. And the smallest sea creatures are microscopic plankton. These tiny creatures form the basis of the oceanic food chain on which all the higher animals depend. And some fish have enviably long lives, sometimes living for up to 150 years. But though the oceans are often deep and mysterious, we do know that it is the rotation of the Earth that causes water to circle away from the equator. This creates the major currents. The Gulf Stream is probably the most famous of these. At a speed of 60 miles per day, a warm stream of water is moved across the Atlantic Ocean. The Gulf Stream moves more than 100 times more water than all the rivers on Earth put together. Waves are primarily created by the friction between the water and the wind, although earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and the tides can cause them too. The kinetic energy that waves create is tremendous. Perhaps the best way of appreciating this is to visualize the damage the sea can cause when it hits the shoreline. At present, this energy is largely unharnessed and goes to waste, but could be a great energy resource if we could learn to control it. As a species, humans provide the biggest threat to the oceans. We regularly pump sewage, fertilizers, soap, radioactive waste, and much more into the oceans. In any one year, we dispose of more rubbish in the sea than the weight of fish caught. The question is, how long can the oceans accommodate our filthy habits before they are irreparably damaged? Already over 60% of the world's coral reefs are threatened by pollution, sedimentation, and the bleaching that is caused by rising water temperatures. And the damage done to marine wildlife by floating plastics and other pollutants is also considerable. Surely it is time to mend our ways.
Part 3. You will hear part of a discussion between two experts, Alan Evans and Clara Walsh, who are talking about the pros and cons of renting or buying your home. For questions 16 to 20, choose the answer A, B, C, or D, which fits best according to what you hear. You now have 1 minute in which to look at Part 3.
Our topic today is home ownership, and the first issue for discussion is the question of whether it is better to rent or to buy your home. With us to discuss this topic are Alan Evans, who writes about financial issues for Life and Living magazine, and Clara Walsh, who writes the Home Not House column for the magazine Family Matters. Clara, where do you stand on this question?
Well, of course, it's a very personal decision. What's right for one person won't necessarily be appropriate for another. There are so many different variables involved, and you need to give careful consideration to each and every one of them. For example, if you're only planning to live in a particular town or neighbourhood for a limited period of time, there's often little point in buying a house or flat there.
Yes, that's very true. The decision will depend to a large extent on both your individual circumstances and on your personal preferences. I think it's worth noting something which is relevant regardless of whether you plan to buy or rent. Let's say that you are moving to a different city because you have accepted an offer of a job there. Whether you ultimately buy or rent a property there, it is important first to check out if the property is convenient for your work and whether it's in a neighborhood which offers all the amenities that you consider important. You also need to think about your finances and get expert advice on whether house prices are on an upward trajectory in that neighborhood. But all of that is irrelevant if you think you might regret choosing to live there.
Yes, that's a good point, and for that reason it's a good idea not to rush into any decisions. Okay, if you rent a flat and then discover some disadvantages that put you off that neighbourhood, it won't be too difficult to relocate. However, if you've become a homeowner, things will be more complicated. From that point of view, even if you're planning to buy a house, it can be advantageous to rent for a while at first.
Of course, once you've decided that the location suits you, then you can think about finding a flat or a house to buy, if that's what your long-term plan is. There are several reasons why you may decide to become a homeowner. One is to have something that you can call your own. If you are a tenant, you'll probably never be able to get a guarantee that you won't be asked to find somewhere else to live. The law gives tenants a certain amount of security. You can't be kicked out on very short notice, for example, but it might not be as much as you'd like. Another factor to consider is that if you're a homeowner, you have an asset that should be retaining its value or even becoming more valuable. Tenants, on the other hand, are spending money on rent that they will never get back.
We should also remember that the landlord may ask the tenant for more money. The law sometimes prevents this from happening, but from time to time it gives landlords the opportunity to raise the rent. Another concern affecting tenants, especially long-term ones, arises when they decide there are changes they would like to make to the property. Obviously, they will only be allowed to do so if the landlord approves of the changes. On the other hand, a homeowner won't face similar worries. The only requirement will be to make sure that their home improvements comply with town planning laws and building regulations.
Tell me, Alan, you've mentioned some advantages homeowners have over tenants, but in most cases, the owner has to pay a mortgage for 25 to 30 years, the loan they have to take out to buy their house. What happens if they lose their job and can't pay their mortgage installments?
Well, yes. They're in a very difficult position then. For this reason, banks and building societies usually force borrowers to take out an insurance policy to cover this contingency. Otherwise, the borrower will have to sell the house to pay off the loan.
These potential problems are something that I always warn people about when they are thinking about becoming homeowners. My advice to them is to spend a year paying a sum of money into their bank account every month, equivalent to what they'd have to pay for a mortgage. They not only find out if they can afford a mortgage, they also save for a deposit on the house, thus reducing the size of the loan they need.
Sounds like good advice to me.
Part 4. Part 4 consists of 2 tasks. You will hear 5 short extracts in which different people are talking about eating out. Look at Task 1. For questions 21 to 25, choose from the list A to H what each speaker's profession is. Now look at Task 2. For questions 26 to 30, choose from the list A to H, the main reason they like a particular establishment. While you listen, you must complete both tasks. Speaker 1.
When I'm on duty on the ward, I'm on my feet for at least 10 hours a day. I love taking care of others, but at the end of a hard shift, I want to go somewhere where I'll be waited on hand and foot for a change. That's why I love Max's. They always make you feel special and pay attention to every little detail. Of course it costs a bomb, but for me it's worth it. Anyway, it's not like I go there every night, just once or twice a month. And if I'm a bit strapped for cash, I only order a main course. Steak with cream and mushroom sauce, or grilled salmon, something like that. My mouth's watering just at the thought of it.
Speaker 2.
The steakhouse just around the corner, that's where I go because you get these enormous juicy T-bone steaks served on a cast iron plate with loads of chips on the side, and mushrooms and tomatoes too. The atmosphere's not bad either. Got a sort of a Wild West feel to it. The staff wear cowboy hats and there's country and western music playing. I usually go with the lads from work. Those mega servings would probably horrify my doctor, but they pose no problem for anyone who's been working on a building site all day. That's us set for the evening and we have a great time.
Speaker 3.
In this day and age, it's amazing that restaurants serving good quality vegetarian food are still so few and far between. That's why I treasure the Green Room, a beautiful little place in Park Lane. It's run by an adorable couple called Jenny and Gerald. Ever since I wrote a glowing review of the place and posted it on my blog, always made sure I get the best table whenever I book. The food is excellent, with the best ingredients and as fresh as can be. You can almost taste the vitamins. I believe your body is a temple and you should treat it with reverence. I always tell my students that it's really important for dancers to eat healthily, and I'm very happy to practice what I preach.
Speaker 4. My favourite place to grab a bite to eat is the golf club after playing 18 holes on a Sunday afternoon. Obviously, only members are allowed in, so you tend to see the same faces every week. Most are local business owners, and a few of them are clients of mine. They tease me that it's the commission I get from deals with them that's paying for my lunch. It's a welcoming place with a friendly but quiet atmosphere, perfect for unwinding after a busy week. They serve a beautiful Sunday lunch, roast beef, Yorkshire pudding and all the trimmings. And the servers don't hover over you, but they remain at a discreet distance. It's just about ideal. Speaker 5.
There's an Italian restaurant on Hobart Street which I absolutely love. I first discovered it a few years ago when I was writing a story on the local hospital. One of the nurses arranged to meet me there for an interview. It isn't too hard on your wallet, and the food is wonderful. Traditional dishes like spaghetti with fresh basil, pizza with loads of mozzarella, and the desserts. Don't get me started on them. The tiramisu is especially delicious. The place is always packed, so the owners could probably get away with higher prices if they wanted to, but I think they value their regular customers too much for that.